I'm looking for my wife, am I right? Oh! Psychological horror is the most fascinating subgenre of horror because it's an escape from the predictable formula we see in almost every spooky movie, video, and game. How many times does a movie have to show you a spooky thing? You go, that is a spooky thing. The tension dies down. You say, whew, thank God the scary part is over. There's a second or two of silence, and then bam, jump scare, and you're all like, whoa, that was scary, but that really just sucked ass, didn't it? How scary is a scary movie when the looming threat seems to act the same as it does in pretty much every other horror medium? Who can forget the demon that teleports? No. The masked killer? The threat outside of oneself? It's an easy tale to write because we love being victims. Everybody in some shape or form has been traumatized at one point in their life, and there's probably a moment that you think back to every now and then, even though it's been a long time since that event took place. I can write scripts, draw pictures, and play PUBG all I want, but none of that will ever make me forget that one scene from Twilight Princess. I was like 7, okay? It's a really common practice for somebody to identify with their traumas. There's nothing more validating than being a victim. My favorite line in Fight Club is when the unnamed protagonist is speaking with Marla at the cancer group, and they have this exchange.
No, look, this is important, okay? These are my groups. I've been coming here for over a year.
Why do you do it?
I don't know. When people think you're dying, man, they really, really listen to you
Instead of just waiting for their turn to speak.
Yeah.
This is a huge reason for why people identify so much with their trauma. So of course, being chased down by a threat that we have no control over is exactly the kind of thing that attracts us. It's an easy narrative to latch onto. But psychological horror is different. When you're backstage, is it the spectators that's scary, or is it the worst case scenario swimming around in your head that's making the other side so terrifying? Is it the dark hallway that's scary, or is it what you think is hiding in the shadows that makes you stay in the light? Oftentimes, we are the prey of our own mind, which, unlike being chased down by a masked killer, happens to every single one of us. Psychological horror is personal. It's a deep dive into our innate fears, our worst memories, and our biggest regrets. From an outside perspective, the subgenre appears to be twisted and nonsensical, but behind the many layers of symbolism, it's extremely grounded and real. Generally speaking, video games have one advantage over the other entertainment mediums when it comes to horror, and that's the ability to slap horror elements into a game without tarnishing the core art piece. A light-hearted book or movie can have a creepy chapter in it, but it needs to be cleverly integrated, otherwise it could ruin the pacing. Ultimately, it needs to somehow move the plot forward. That is, if the book or movie is in a chapter-to-chapter format and not a collection of short stories like The Last Wish, for example.
Another rape scene?
Open world and level-based games are able to shine with random terrifying moments because they don't have to worry about strict plot progression, since they have the excuse of making it side content or a level that needs to be memorable in some unique way. Red Dead Redemption 2 has a lot of beauty in its world. Hunting legendary animals and playing cards is fun, but sometimes while minding your own business and taking in the gorgeous environment, Rockstar will just throw some shit like this in your face. The serial killer side mission in Red Dead 2 separates itself from the main game by creating its own ambience. Every clue pointing towards the culprit stands out because of how brutal each killing is. And Arthur having to physically pull the paper map pieces out of the victims' heads is memorably gross. Once you reach the serial killer's hideout, the beautiful acoustic music Red Dead's known for turns into a warped, somber tune, and the mutilated bodies of the victims decorating the basement makes the scene even more sinister. The mission ends quite comically in classic Rockstar fashion, but overall, it's a really unsettling optional part of the game.
You are a frightening fella.
Oh, I'll behave, sir. I'll behave as expected.
Well, you better. And I'll get you a lawyer, don't you worry about that. And you get in that cell, calm as you be. My lord. What a monster!
And if we're talking about creepy moments in video games that you have to participate in to progress the story, what's a better example than Ocarina of Time's Shadow Temple? Prior to this dungeon, the game is in trademark Nintendo fashion pretty lighthearted, but as Link physically ages after the first 3 dungeons, Ocarina of Time becomes less inviting and more true to life, and this is because Link's psychological state ages as well. There's little bits of symbolism in the game showing the difference in Link's innocence. After Ganondorf successfully chases the princess and her guard out of Hyrule Castle, you can find a soldier injured in a back alley who tells Link to go to the Temple of Time. But once he finishes giving the instructions to Link, he stops moving. What's so strange about this interaction is that not only is Link unaware that this person just died right in front of him, but the music playing is still the upbeat Hyrule Castle town track, and this is because Link's still a child, he's still innocent. The music isn't aligned with what's going on because his mental state is still that of a young boy who's destined to be a hero. It's clear that when he becomes an adult, after pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal, Ocarina of Time loses young Link's rose-colored glasses. When he enters Lon Lon Ranch, he's exposed to greed. When he goes to Kakariko Village, he's exposed to human death with Dompe's ghost, and even the songs that Link learns on his ocarina reflect the dark reality of adult Link's new world. As a child, he learns the Sun Song, Saria's Song, Zelda's Lullaby, Epona's Song, and the Song of Time. All of those melodies reflect hope, friendship, and a new age. But as an adult, he learns the Song of Storms and a handful of other ones that act as fast travel points for dungeons that he needs to clear out to save Hyrule. I think it's interesting that the only lighthearted song he learns as an adult, Prelude of Light, is the one that warps him to the Temple of Time so he can return to happier days. This development in Link's psyche is shown best when he's tasked to go to the Shadow Temple. At this point in Ocarina of Time, Link hadn't gone back to his childhood because the Forest, Fire, and Water Temple all required him being an adult to enter them. However, an item that's needed to clear the Shadow Temple is at the bottom of Kakariko Village as well, and because of it being inaccessible in adult Link's world, he needs to travel back in time to enter it, and what he finds is the biggest shift in theme ever. Prior to this moment, Child Link's world was that of a fantasy. Monsters would talk to him if he taught them a lesson. An annoying owl would give him friendly guidance. Evil was there, but it wasn't necessarily visible. But because the young Link that visits the well had already grown up, his perception of the world had inevitably changed, and that's what the bottom of the well represents. The blood on the wall, the skulls of the deceased, the tortured souls who still roam, and the remains of brutal torture devices used at one point by the guards of the royal family. To top it all off, the item that Link discovers at the end of this mini dungeon is none other than the Lens of Truth, which makes sense because before he entered that well, he probably saw his childhood as a perfect haven where nothing could ever go wrong. But when leaving the well, he returns to his beautiful childhood world with an understanding of the grass not really being greener on the other side, but instead the innocence of childhood making everything seem better than it actually was. And after facing that truth, he enters the Shadow Temple. According to the Zelda Encyclopedia, the Shadow Temple was a place where the Sheikah would interrogate and torture the enemies of Hyrule under the rule of the royal family, aka Princess Zelda's relatives. It's seen as a piece of the royal family's dark history and is a taboo subject in Hyrule. While exploring it, the spirits that inhabit the temple guide the way, and as you descend deeper and deeper into the dungeon, you're exposed to many more torture devices left over, and backing the disturbing area is this somber, almost demonic song, setting the tone for this part of the game. Truth. The reason why this execution of horror, no pun intended, works so well is because it's not only out of left field in a game that mostly caters to a very young audience, but also because it makes perfect sense in the context of Link's journey. Growing up isn't just getting stronger, it's facing the true horrors of reality, and how even the people you love and trust have gone through dark times as well. And it's the fact that you, the player, have to overcome this terrifying part of the game yourself that makes it so perfect. This type of horror is something that could only work in a video game, because you're the one who's experiencing Link's journey into maturity. And because you're forced into conquering the symbolic but true horrors of adulthood, you leave the dungeon feeling like you just aced an important test of courage. Oh wow, you're scared of the Shadow Temple? Yes, dude, I was f***ing not! But enough about Zelda. Let's talk about P.T, also known as Playable Teaser, also known as Damn It! Was a liminal horror game that in its entirety was a riddle for people over the internet to decipher. At E3, it was announced that 7780 Studios was behind the title, but the development team was fake and was actually a hint to what the true identity behind the mysterious game was. 7780 is the geographic location for the Shizuoka Prefecture in Japan, and if you read the two kanji characters for Shizuoka separately, you get Silent Hill. Each part of the game requires the player to think outside the box to move on to the next area, including moments like saying a name into your PlayStation controller and sitting completely still while waiting for a phone to ring. After passing the riddles, you're rewarded with the trailer for the next Silent Hill game, and unfortunately, it got cancelled. Oh
Oh no!
PT was removed from the PlayStation Store, but consoles with the game still on them go for over $600 in Canada and sometimes surpass $1,000 because they're so rare. Aside from the context behind PT, its design alone is enough to call it a true work of art in the psychological horror genre. The whole game happens in one repeating hallway. The camera effects like the film grain and lighting flares give it a photorealistic look, and the crying fetus and ominous dialogue over the radio allude to a greater narrative. Hideo Kojima, the director behind PT, has stated that there is no direct correlation between it and Silent Hills plot-wise. So the sad part is that we officially know nothing about Silent Hills and what it could have been. But on the bright side, PT is able to shine as its own separate psychological horror game, following a silent protagonist who's trying to escape this cryptic, claustrophobic home. Because of its removal from the PlayStation Store, unsolved narrative, and terrifying moments amplified by the liminal space-like hallway, PT will forever be remembered as not only a piece of gaming history, but also a psychological trip that did what no other game had done before.
Dad was such a drag. Every day he'd eat the same kind of food, dress the same, sit in front of the same kind of games. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. But then one day he goes and kills us all. He couldn't even be original about the way he did it. I'm not complaining. I was dying of boredom anyway. But guess what? I will be coming back.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
Something that the psychological horror subgenre doesn't get enough credit for is that most of the movies, books, and games in that genre don't rely on shock value to deliver an impactful message. The Shining is one of the most critically acclaimed movies of all time, and it's memorable not so much because of its thrilling climax, but because of the way it executes its progressively intense scene delivery. Even the opening scene is 3 minutes of mountainous landscape. The ominous music and inconspicuous credits are the only other things accompanying the unsettling introduction. Stanley Kubrick didn't have to scare viewers by getting Jack Torrance to kill Danny and eat his guts on screen and then rip off his top tooth and circumcise himself with it. I mean, obviously you wouldn't do that because it would betray the source material, but the most disturbing parts of The Shining are the weird moments, the interaction Jack has with the caretaker, the twins in the hallway, the shot that pans over the hedge maze while Jack watches over his family like a puppeteer. It's the subtle nudges at your brain that push you to the edge, and especially in modern media, I feel that subtlety has died a little bit.
Who would do this?
Last year, I watched a movie called Sinister. Sinister follows Ellison Oswalt, a true crime novelist who moves his family into a home where 4 murders took place in the hope that he could solve them, write a hit, and relive the prime of his writing career. I found Ellison to be the main strength of this movie. He's a protagonist with a goal and insecurities that fuel that goal, which allows the viewer to root for him, since it's easy to root for a man with human desires and motivations. He certainly has selfish tendencies, but he's undeniably brave considering how far he goes to accomplish his dream. And to accomplish his dream, he watches these videotapes with the murders recorded on them to get some clues and solve the mystery. While the premise of the movie is original and gripping, the execution was, in my personal opinion, extremely underwhelming and a great example of how modern horror is oftentimes written. Right from the opening scene, we see a family being hung from a tree with ominous music playing in the background. Your first impression of this movie isn't an introduction to its characters, an interesting question, a tense scene that could lead to something more frightening. It's a scene that would emotionally affect pretty much every single person watching it, since it targets an innate fear. It plays on our natural human empathy. Compare this to Silent Hill 2's opening, with James staring into a mirror with shadows covering his eyes, symbolizing his flawed sense of self and a bigger story underneath his external image. Or like I said earlier, The Shining, with its beautiful landscapes but mysterious off-putting music backing the scene for 3 minutes, amplifying the strange feeling of isolation. Both of those opening scenes didn't need to shock the viewer into paying attention. They were just interesting enough with their own visual storytelling that most people were already glued to the screen. On the videotapes that Ellison watches to conclude his murder mystery case, there's detailed, gory footage of families being murdered in brutal ways. And it absolutely succeeds in making you uncomfortable, but not because of clever storytelling, but because, like I said earlier, it just plays on an innate fear. A family being killed is a very, very, very broad taboo subject and will affect pretty much every single person watching, so you're guaranteed attention from the audience no matter how you write it. And the villain of the movie was a demon from ancient paganism? Well, that's never been done before. A long time ago, there were a set list of rules that prevented or required certain things being shown on TV, and that was called the Television Code of 1952. The code ensured that in media, police officers would not only be treated with respect, but would be respectful to the citizens and would arrest the antagonist or criminal at the end of the movie/scene. The motive of revenge being an excuse for murder would be shown as unconditionally unjustifiable. The kidnapping of children or reference to kidnapping of children was prohibited. Parents were to be represented in a moral and respected light, and so on. There were a lot of rules, and over time, different shows and movies have ticked away at that list, and in my opinion, that in itself is a good thing. Freedom of speech and freedom of art is what keeps us developing as a human race. Who knows where we would be if there was never a Protestant revolution in the 1500s, or if Nintendo never made the Wii U. But with that power comes responsibility. With limitations comes the beauty of subtlety. The impact of the message doesn't come from saying it outright, but comes from implying it. Oftentimes, family-friendly video games and movies are critically acclaimed because of their creativity. It's easy to make a character impactful to the viewer if you introduce them with, their mom died, they have an eating disorder, they have a worm in their head that eats their brain. It's a lot harder to write a troubled character when you're limited by what's okay to say and what's not. And that's actually a good thing because it invites the writers who can think outside the box to write an engaging story and not just what will shock the viewer enough into thinking it's deep writing. Quick spoiler warning for the end of The Shining, skip here if you care. Eventually, The Shining's tension snaps and Jack starts frantically trying to kill his family. Every tick at Jack's conscience comes together in this horrifying climax. Each moment is perfectly designed to make you feel like everything's over at all times. When Wendy corners herself in the bathroom, when Danny's navigating the hedge maze. It's a great climax with a great conclusion, and all the subtle moments building up to it is what made it perfect. Stanley Kubrick didn't have to open up Wendy's stomach and twist a lemon into it to make it scary. It was the slow buildup that brought everything together. And that's why Silent Hill 2 Remake is the best game ever! Let's go! A lot of horror video games are very guilty for relying on shock value to make something scary. And it's not that cheap scares isn't fun every once in a while, but it certainly gets repetitive. Games like Silent Hill, on the other hand, are a lot of note reading. Wandering, puzzle solving, and story analyzing. In Silent Hill, James, the main character, encounters 4 different people while searching for his thought-to-be-dead wife. The dialogue between him and the other characters sounds unnatural, but within that weirdness is subtlety that in the original game, Team Silent couldn't accomplish because of the limits of the PlayStation 2.
I see that you didn't make it out yet.
Yeah. I just didn't get around to it yet.
At least you got your appetite back.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
She said she was fine by herself. She said a fatso like me would just slow her down.
Forget you.
Spoiler warning for Silent Hill 2 Remake's prison boss fight. Skip to this time if you care, or if you're sensitive to sexual abuse. One of the most obscure characters you encounter in Silent Hill is Angela, and she's looking for her parents and brother, but primarily her mother. Even from that first interaction, you can tell that she has a warped sense of self and time because of the way she refers to her mother.
I'm looking for my mama. My mother. It's been so long since I've seen her. I thought my father and brother were here, but I can't find them either.
While not much is revealed early on, you quickly discover that she clearly suffers depression and contemplates taking her life, so James holds onto her knife to prevent her from causing any harm. While James is searching for a little girl because she allegedly knows something about his wife, he has one last interaction with Angela before the battle with her childhood trauma, and it's there where we get a glimpse into her deep-rooted fear.
Oh, you didn't happen to see a little girl around here, did you?
A little girl?
Yeah, Angela? Are you all right? Angela?
No. Please. You shouldn't be here.
Angela. It's okay.
No, don't touch me!
James saying he was looking for a little girl clearly cuts somewhere deep in her heart. And after seeing why exactly she ended up in Silent Hill, it's pretty clear why. Abstract Daddy is the most fucked up boss fight I have ever experienced in any video game. After clearing Silent Hill's prison, James enters a new area that resembles a home. After hearing some commotion going on in one of the rooms, James finds Angela hiding from something, and it's there where we encounter Abstract Daddy. This monstrosity is a direct manifestation of Angela's childhood trauma, and to fight it, you essentially have to live out her childhood trauma. Most of the fight is spent running down these repetitive, claustrophobic corridors, only for him to burst through a wall and try to chase you down again. As the battle goes on, the house slowly crumbles to pieces and becomes so deformed that the walls eventually look like this. In between each chase, there's moments of peace, including a few times where you can enter Angela's closet, but even that gets destroyed along with the hallways towards the end of the battle. When you look at how this fight was executed in the original game, it's night and day. In the OG Silent Hill 2, the boss attacks James in one room, and all you need to do is run around and hit it until you win. However, in the remake, like I said, you really get to see the impact of intense trauma firsthand, and this boss fight is something that could only work in a video game. Because you're not directly impacted in a movie or book, without even noticing, you could zone out. But because of Silent Hill 2's inconsistent checkpoint system, audio design, and claustrophobic movement, it's pure survival instinct, that entire battle. It's you versus the monster. The monster's design is also nothing short of nightmare fuel. Over top of what seems to be a wooden mattress is two humanoid figures. The one on top roars in anger, while the one on the bottom shrieks in pain, and to make things worse, behind it you can see 2 feet poking out of the blanket. Because Silent Hill is different for every person who goes there, this is only James' perception of what Angela's monster looked like. Masahiro Ito, one of the lead artists behind Silent Hill 2, said, "Only Angela knows what she sees. James, players, and I can't see what she sees. We are on James' side, and who can say that the Abstract Daddy, which James can see, is the same as hers?" Masahiro Ito has also stated that Angela's version of him is probably much more terrifying than what we saw, because James only has an idea of what Angela's childhood must have been like, while she actually lived it out. While this fight is certainly shocking, it's far from what I like to call shock bait. There's a bunch of subtle hints to Angela's character leading up to this moment, and the fight itself has clever subtleties in it that directly relate to trauma, like the many fans and TVs in the environment symbolizing Angela's disassociation, the crumbling home representing her crumbling sense of security, and of course the biggest example of that being her safe space, her closet, breaking towards the end of the fight as well. And the way that she just freezes up during the post-battle cutscene after James raises his voice at her like somebody would if they had PTSD is the writing equivalent to a fucking mic drop, which just brings everything together in the most tragic, brutal, but effective way possible.
Admit it. You didn't want her around anymore.
No.
You probably found someone else.
No.
I need to find my mama.
It's f***ed, but it's undeniably a work of well-written psychological horror that only a modern video game could accomplish. I am not at all dunking on older titles though. I think there's absolutely a place for that kind of horror. Sometimes I worry about Silent Hill 3 getting a remake because I'm not quite sure how they'd capture the creepiness of that title on modern hardware. The old cinematic locked camera angles created a unique feeling of suspense, and on modern hardware this would be seen as janky, but it only makes the game better from a horror standpoint because it takes control away from the player and makes you feel uncomfortable. Sometimes when you enter new places in the game, there's little hints of life other than yourself, but for some reason it still feels empty. In the cutscenes, the interactions Heather has with the other characters could be considered corny by today's standards, but it actually elevates the uncanny nature of Silent Hill 3 because of how unconventional the dialogue is.
You know, if you hadn't found me...
What are you talking about? What's so special about you anyway?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be so confused, would I?
When I played Silent Hill 2 Remake, I felt like thinking. I felt like analyzing the symbolism behind the characters and my own life. When I played Silent Hill 3, I felt fucking crazy. When you're traversing the hallways of each Zelda dungeon-like area, you're constantly second-guessing if you're progressing the game or if you've already been down that hallway once before. You're gathering random junk that will apparently come in handy later, and the limited safe areas plus difficulty spikes makes you hesitate entering each new room. Silent Hill 3's unforgivable early 2000s game design unintentionally makes it a better psychological horror game with time, and accomplishes its main goal, which is making the player feel unsafe. Say, have you ever played Outlast 2? Outlast 2 is the most stressful game that I have ever played. And I know some smartass in the comments is already typing, Outlast 2 is the most stressful game you've ever played? Talk about basic. You ever even heard of the Slender Man? But I stand by it. What makes Outlast 2 unique as a horror game is that it's essentially a double-double where you get half psychological brain f***ery and half physical threat. The enemy AI is unreasonably intelligent because they can hear you even while you're crawling around. They'll always look in whatever area you're hiding, and they'll even try to break doors that you lock and crawl under surfaces that you try to escape from. The cultists don't act as NPCs that you're supposed to go around. They're just people that really want to kill you as fast as possible, and not once do they make you feel like you have an advantage. The level design of Outlast 2 is strategically laid out to make you feel uncomfortable all the time. Usually in video games you can tell if a boss fight is about to happen because all of a sudden you'll be slapped in the face with a plethora of resources inside of a conveniently placed storage container, or the area will somewhat open up, revealing a ton of escape routes and vantage points. But no matter where you are in Outlast 2, it makes you feel like a chase is about to happen. I noticed pretty early on that even in locations where nothing happens, there are still interactive hiding spots so that no matter where you are, it feels like you're in danger. It tricks your gamer mind into thinking, okay, so the developer has placed this convenience for me because something dangerous is about to happen, but oftentimes it doesn't. It happens when you least expect it. Crawling around in tall grass to evade detection is also uncomfortably unreliable because your own footsteps and the sounds of moving grass covers up the cultist footsteps, so you don't even notice how close somebody is to you because the sound all blends together. It also doesn't help much that the grass itself is dense and clouds your vision. Aside from stealth gameplay, running from point A to point B isn't much of a strategy either, since each area is so dark you never have a clear destination in front of you, and the buildings are so close together that making an escape feels borderline impossible at times. Stealth isn't rewarded because the game forces you out of hiding, and running isn't rewarded because the level design is so linear and hordes of cultists will see you immediately. The main character has recurring flashbacks of their traumatic past, and this is where Outlast 2's horror shifts from physical fear to mental torment. When navigating his old Catholic school, vague messages and faint voices reveal a bigger picture over time. And because the game looks borderline photorealistic and most schools look identical, the flashback segments aren't hard to immerse yourself in whether you like it or not. Outlast 2, from its environmental design, artificial intelligence, and unpredictability, is the ultimate recipe for a game that never makes you feel like you can put your guard down. The team at Red Barrels are experts at what they do, and their Q&A on Reddit from 11 years ago is still an interesting read.
Loved the game, didn't like the ending. Who was the penis model?
We took Valve's idea on how they created Gordon Freeman's face. They basically merged different features from team members into one face.
There's a common theme with this subgenre of horror, and the word has come up a couple times in this video. Let's talk about guilt. Psychological horror more often than not tackles guilt and what it feels like to be tormented with the idea that you're not the good guy. I'm about to spoil the shit out of this 2-hour indie game, so Detention follows Fang Rei Shin, a high school student who wakes up in the school's auditorium alone and afraid. A river of blood blocks the exits, and the only other habitants in the school are spirits from Taiwanese mythology. The game is set in the 1960s, during the White Terror time period between the 40s and 90s, where government control was at an all-time high, and civilians would be imprisoned or even executed for seemingly insignificant crimes like slander against the government. In Detention, Ray spent her late high school years neglecting studies and seeking happiness outside of her broken home life. Meanwhile, a group of students and a teacher in her school had formed a book club where they studied illegal literature, and after getting the club's book list from a lower classman, she handed it over to instructor Bai, who is a military officer posted to the school by the government. The game transitions from being about a creepy school with monsters to the haunted past of somebody who feels like a monster. As Ray navigates her troubled past, there's instances of cheer and approval, but it's nothing more than confirmation of her betrayal over and over again. Psychological horror is the most real kind of horror, because oftentimes our biggest obstacles are what we've brought on ourselves. We are hardwired to put up mental walls and justify our actions at all times, because it's It's our body's natural survival instinct. I didn't graduate high school one summer because I applied myself. I graduated late because I'm fucking stupid. Psychological horror is intelligent media because it strips the fantasy of unconditional justice and brings you into the reality of good and evil. I don't think Fang Rei Shin is an evil character. Combined with a troubled past, governmental pressure, and the disapproval of the adults in her life, she made a terrible choice. But detention wouldn't exist if Rei was evil. It exists because her guilty conscience reminds her of her mistakes. We love to stick with this narrative that a character is good and a character is bad, and then we ultimately decide what they deserve. But the truth is, it's never about good or evil. It's a matter of where you fit in the gray. It's unhealthy as people to set a perfect standard of what makes somebody inherently evil, because the fact is, you might not have reported your peers to a radical government, but you've certainly done something that doesn't need justification, and if you can't think of any one thing, you've probably blocked it out of your memory. It's scary, but it's also one of the most important things we can do as human beings is recognize our faults, recognize when we were wrong, and try to wake up as an equal to the people around us every single day. Maybe you talk too much, maybe you made a poorly timed joke, maybe you stole something, maybe you forgot to say thank you, maybe you killed somebody. Regardless of circumstance, you're still a human, you're still complicated, and while it's really difficult to be critical of yourself, it's necessary to grow as a person. And that's why I love psychological horror. It turns video games from an escape to a time for reflection, a time where I, along with somebody else, can face some hard to swallow truth. And when I get up from my computer, I feel like I have a new perspective on how I can be a better person in whatever way that means. Maybe you make stupid YouTube videos. But most importantly, what do you guys think about all this? What's the scariest game you've ever played? And are there any psychological pieces of horror that stick out to you? Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below and I'll check them out as soon as I possibly can. As always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video. Make sure to have a good one, and all that matters at the end of the day is if it makes you happy, it can't be that bad. Oh my gosh, guys. I cannot thank you enough for all the support you've been showing the channel this past few months. It's been an absolute dream come true. I've said it a million times before, but I'm going to say it again. I want to make videos until I die. So if that means you guys will keep watching them, then that makes me happy. Make sure to remember that you are a lovely human being and just have a good day.